They called him the Dream. But for those who had to guard him, he was nothing short of a nightmare. David Robinson, one of the most dominant big men in NBA history, once stood across from him and was left bewildered, almost powerless, as Hakeem. Olajuwon dismantled every defensive strategy thrown his way. He had no weaknesses, no holes to exploit. He was, by all accounts, the most complete center the game had ever seen. The numbers alone tell part of the story. The best shot blocker in NBA history, top 10 in career steals, a top scorer who, by the end of his career, ranked 7th all-time in total points. But those are only the surface-level details. The real story is far more unlikely, almost impossible when you think about it. Because unlike the other greats who grew up dreaming of the NBA from the moment they could walk, Hakeem Olajuwon had never even touched a basketball until he was 15 years old. Before he was Hakeem, the Dream, before the silky footwork and unstoppable post moves, before the championships and Hall of Fame speeches, he was just a tall kid in Lagos, Nigeria. His real dream at that time? Soccer Olajuwon grew up in 1960s Nigeria, the third of 6 children born to parents who owned a cement business. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't extravagant either. They envisioned their son one day taking over the family business. Hakeem, or Akeem as he was originally known, had no such plans. Like so many African children, his first love was the beautiful game. He wanted to be an athlete, and soccer was his entire world. As the tallest player on the field, his role was always goalkeeper. That position required agility, quick reflexes, and unmatched footwork. And though no one could have known it at the time, those very skills would one day become the foundation for one of the most devastating low-post arsenals in basketball history. But soccer wasn't his only athletic pursuit. As a teenager, he also picked up handball, thriving because of his size, wingspan, and natural coordination. For a while, it seemed as though his path would remain tied to those sports. But fate intervened in the most unlikely of ways. At 15, Hakeem entered a local basketball tournament in Nigeria. He was tall, athletic, and eager, but when it came to actual basketball skills, he was completely out of his depth. At one point, a coach demonstrated how to dunk by standing on a chair, jumping off, and slamming the ball through the rim. Wanting to mimic the move, Hakeem climbed onto the chair, leapt, and dunked. But when the coach explained that the point of a dunk was to jump from the floor, not with assistance, Olajuwon tried and failed. Despite standing 6'7" at the time, he couldn't do it. But if there was one thing about Hakeem, it was that he never backed down from a challenge. What started as a moment of embarrassment soon became an obsession. Basketball gripped him, refusing to let go. He continued playing handball for another year, but the seeds had been planted. And by the time he was 17, he had grown into his full 6'11" frame with a wingspan that stretched an absurd 7'5". Now he had the tools, and soon enough, he found the confidence. Representing Nigeria at the U18 Afro-Basket tournament, Olajuwon dominated opponents, earning MVP honors. Even though his team only managed to secure a bronze medal, it was there that destiny knocked again. Christopher Pond, an American scout coaching the Central African Republic, noticed the raw, unpolished gem towering above the competition. He told Hakeem that with his talent and size, he could land a scholarship to play college basketball in the United States. For a kid who had only recently learned how to dribble and shoot, the idea seemed almost unreal. But Olajuwon's eyes lit up. He wanted more. Through Pond's contacts, visits were arranged with schools like St. John's, Providence, Georgia, and Houston. The decision came down to something simple: climate. Houston reminded Hakeem of Nigeria. The hot Texas weather felt like home. And so in 1981, he arrived in America, ready to pursue the unknown. But his welcome was anything but glamorous. No one from the school showed up to greet him at the airport. He was left to figure it out on his own, hailing a taxi and making his way to the University of Houston with nothing more than determination. And yet, the biggest problem wasn't the lack of a warm welcome, it was his shoes. In Nigeria, it had been nearly impossible to find size 16 sneakers. The pair he owned were 2 sizes too small, painful reminders of the obstacles he still faced. To make matters worse, The NCAA ruled him ineligible to play his first season. Redshirting meant no games, no official minutes. But in hindsight, it may have been the best thing for him. That year became his foundation, a time to lift weights, build muscle, learn English, and immerse himself fully in the game. By the 1981-82 season, Olajuwon finally suited up for the Houston Cougars. At first, his role was small, averaging just 8 points and 6 rebounds off the bench. But even in limited minutes, his presence was undeniable, especially on defense, where he blocked nearly 3 shots per game. That year, Houston made it, all the way to the Final Four before falling to a North Carolina team led by none other than a young Michael Jordan. It was the first of many battles between the two legends. Jordan scored 18 points that night. Olajuwon managed just 2. But the encounter only fueled his hunger. Hakeem wanted more. He didn't just want to be a bench player. He wanted to dominate. So he asked his coaches how he could improve. Their answer? Go find Moses Malone. At the time, Moses Malone was the reigning NBA MVP and a star for the Houston Rockets. During the offseason, Malone would play at a nearby rec center, and it was there that Olajuwon sought him out. What followed would become one of the most important mentorships in basketball history. When they first met, Malone was kind, almost gentle. But the moment the games began, that kindness evaporated. Moses was ruthless. He was physical, aggressive, unrelenting. For Olajuwon, it was a shock. He had never experienced basketball played with such ferocity. The first time he tried to dunk, on Malone he was thrown to the ground, but rather than discouraging him, it lit a fire. I would never have accomplished what I did if I did not play against Moses, Hakeem later admitted. With Moses, there were no rests, no breaks. Every possession, he was working, scoring, rebounding, making you feel his body. He taught me what it meant to compete. Day after day, summer after summer, Olajuwon went back for more. And with each bruising battle, he got better. He learned the strength required to play center in America. He learned how to use his footwork, his agility, and his reflexes to counter raw power, and slowly, his game transformed. At Houston, he blossomed into the centerpiece of Phi Slama Jama, the legendary Cougars squad that electrified college basketball with their fast-paced, above-the-rim style. Alongside Clyde Drexler, Olajuwon led Houston to 3 consecutive Final Four appearances. In 1983, they reached the national championship game, but fell to a scrappy NC State team in one of the most iconic upsets in NCAA history. In 1984, they returned to the title game again, only to lose to Patrick Ewing and Georgetown. Despite the heartbreak, Olajuwon's dominance was undeniable. He was named the NCAA tournament's most outstanding player, remarkably, even though his team lost the final. By then, the NBA was watching closely. In 1984, Olajuwon declared for the draft, joining what would become the most legendary class in league history. The Houston Rockets held the first overall pick, and despite names like Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley on the board, they didn't hesitate. With the number 1 selection, they chose Hakeem Olajuwon. The kid from Lagos, the soccer goalkeeper who couldn't dunk at 15, had now become the top pick in the NBA draft. And this was only the beginning of the dream.